Hey up and welcome to the Temple of Blair, episode AC. This is a conversation with Stefan Koster. Stefan headed up the international marketing arm of Roadrunner from the mid-1990s to 2001, but he was with the company from about 1992. So this one's fucking brilliant, dude. I mean, every single word that comes out of Stefan's mouth was like new information for me. And it really helps me sort of appreciate some of the finer aspects of the label's functions. This particular conversation, I feel, is a milestone for me because the sense that Case wanted X, therefore X was delivered, is slowly departing, and it's becoming more of a Case created a ragtag group of people who are so hungry for Roadrunner to be successful, we delivered X. And that particular angle is completely critical to this project as a whole, and as to why Roadrunner is such a special place. So, without further ado, let's jump into it. 1, 2, fuck shit up.
When I joined Roadrunner, it was one of those things where I had some experiences in the field of music and promotion, marketing, stuff like that, but at a label that was the just absolute opposite genre-wise of what Roadrunner was, which was a label in Cologne called Vera Bra. It was jazz and world music. And so, you could say that when I moved over to Roadrunner, Sepultura was certainly a certain type of world music, right?
Yeah,
but it was super heavy, and I had little understanding at the beginning, right? But many of us that worked there as young, individuals didn't have the overall picture of what was going to happen to this label or what could potentially happen to this label, just because we didn't have the knowledge base. We were all just like working. It was fun. It was exciting. Back then, being part of a record label was something your friends were like, whoa, it's like, that's exciting, right? Because it was different from just going to work 9 to 5. I mean, it also obviously came at a price because you were working so hard and so nonstop every day, weekends included for me often, that a lot of personal stuff just fell off the kitchen table, so to speak. But it was exciting, and it was exciting to grow with the company and to step by step get a better understanding of what kind of a rocket ship we were actually on, because that's what it turned into. For me, especially like doing, international, step by step with every, move that I made, the picture got bigger, and my understanding of what was, happening was growing. So that I thought was like super exciting. And it got me from, Cologne, Germany, via Amsterdam to New York.
Well, I think I'm trying to revise the mission statement of this project, because I try and introduce people to it and try and build a runway for us to take off from. I've regaled you with all like previous videos and the documentary and stuff like that. But really the question I always ask is like, why was Roadrunner so special? We know what the answer is. We know the answer is it was a special brand, and it was built off the backs of like a room full of metalheads built by a businessman. And that was the infrastructure. But for me, if I contextualize it against what we were saying earlier in terms of identity, in terms of like communication and information dissemination, these days we're coming out of this weird era of oversaturation. We've had like 10 years of Spotify and YouTube having all the labels in a chokehold. So it was difficult to really navigate musical waters. Now it's getting a little bit easier. And I think in the last 9 years, we've realized what we've lost with Roadrunner. I think we sort of now, and I think because no one's talks about the history of the label, but I think it's important for a number of reasons. Mostly because what Roadrunner did was it took the fringest of the fringe and not only made it commercially viable, but it went toe-to-toe with the majors in a really, really boring time for music. And when I say that, I mean the Simon Cowell era. He's trying to get his foot in the door with his era of algorithmically generated hits when there's 9 nut jobs in jumpsuits selling platinum records.
Yeah.
We as metalheads don't care about sales at all, but we do care about knocking people down a peg. And that's why Roadrunner is important, because it was the vehicle for that to happen. And this entire project is about trying to understand and reverse engineer what happened within those four walls, in those 6, 7, 8 offices, whatever it was, and try and hopefully take some learnings for today so we can sort of navigate going forward. That's the end game. And so that's why I'm dragging people from all four corners of the world and disturbing their work days.
Well, for me, I would say, I've always maintained this. I think that Case's insistence on starting offices in different countries with, and many times just an individual person, a single person that was, that he picked, that he selected, that then went out and began to work the music that we had, the artists that we had, and grow the company. I mean, when I came into the German office as the general manager, I was replacing someone called Frank Ströbele, who went to Amsterdam. So that's how I came in I think it was the end of 91, beginning of 92. Yeah, in that range.
What was the recruitment process like? If we're going to the start, I'll give you the usual gambit. So how were you initially selected?
It's very, very interesting. I was asked by Frank, who had made, who knew someone at the company that I was working for at the time. And, they approached me and were saying, like, listen, we got this call. I don't know if you want to do this, but call this number. And so I spoke to Frank, and I was just like, okay, let's just meet up. And I get to the office, and in the office is Case Vessels and Frank. Yeah. We're in a room talking. Case is asking a lot of questions. He's got his cup of tea in front of him that he always had. And I remember that, he said at some point, he said, how's your English? And I said, fine. He said, can we have this conversation in English? Can we continue in English? And I was just like, yes, of course. And then we went on and just discussed it in English. Background to that is my dad was German military, and I grew up over, an on and off period, in total of six years total there in El Paso, Texas, of all places. Wow. Yeah. Big military base. So my English was fluent. Yeah. And I think that's what sealed the deal right away. It was super easy for them. I had some background in the music business. I knew what, certain things were. Frank could go on to Amsterdam, and I started in an office that probably had 5 or 6 people. Right. So the office in Cologne was established, had, personnel, people that I remember from that time in that office were Heidi Hübner and Jana Posseer and Henk Hacker. I think Torge Berger was in there as well when I got there. And I might, forget some people here and there. But, when I moved away from Cologne to Amsterdam, it was Henk that took over that office.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was, very, very interesting to work there. And at the beginning, like with every new job, you're trying to just be, a team player and to do everything the right way. And I, back then it was the time where we were still working with fax machines, right? And for each release, I had to get approval for the marketing plan and the expenditures from Case directly, right? So I was sweating bullets, like, coming up with the right numbers, right? And sending it out to him and receiving a fax in return where he was either like, this is nonsense, or, yep, let's go. And you had to then, work. It was a very structured environment that Case had created. Yeah. So It was very much we were one of multiple European offices, right? And we were all working together. And I think for the artists that then came through, this was like paradise. It was like being in at a major and not being at a major, right? It was very often that we were all like the same age. Yeah, the people that worked there, promoting, the music, marketing, all that stuff. We had like an infrastructure.
Yeah.
Magazines were there, right? We had great distribution through at that time Intercord. Yeah. We were able to, Roadrunner as a label and Roadrunner as a brand was in that sweet spot where it was, no matter what we put out, it sold. By that I mean it sold in thousands of, completely unknown artists that people had never seen or heard of.
I think you came in at a super interesting time as well, because 92 is when they just start their expansion from thrash and death and into more sort of contemporary. It's in some ways contemporary, but definitely alternative music with things like Grunge Truck, and a few years later, say Blue Mountain State and things like that. Not Blue Mountain State.
Oh, don't forget Valtari, Finnish group that this is another really important thing, right? All these companies, Case was very, very keenly interested right from the get-go in having in signing local acts. Yeah. So I remember we had like a band from Stuttgart called Atrocity.
Valtari. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah. And Valtari were these crazy Finnish guys that had death metal guitars. But if you're interested, look up Valtteri's cover version of Vogue by Madonna at that time. It was crazy stuff, right? But everybody had it was so unregimented in the artistic sense that everything was possible. Obviously at a price point that Case was comfortable with. And it was just, we were talking to so many artists in Germany. And I know that, Stefan Saunier in France was talking to French artists, like Mark Palmer was talking to people in the UK, the guys in the Benelux office were doing, look, that was the time too of, that came a little bit later, but Mokum Records, with Fred Burkhout, who started that and ran that. But that was a crazy hardcore dance scene in Amsterdam, right? But it worked really well with great hits at that point. So step by step, we were coming into this whole thing. And I remember like one of the first things in Germany that we charted was Biohazard. Yeah. I had this bet going with Case. Case was like, "You're never going to chart this." And I said, "Oh yeah, it's well prepared. We've got everybody on board and it is going to happen." And he was like incredulous. He was just like, "No way." Right. And then we did chart. It worked out because it was, the personal relationships that you begin to develop with the distributors are extremely important, because those are the people that are, at the end of the day, out there selling. And they were very much still out there as individuals, the salespeople, going from store to store or chain to chain to put our product into these stores. And the better your relationship with these people, the more you could get out of them.
That's where our friend Alan Becker comes in.
Yes. Roadrunner has been with Alan. I saw like Brian's, I was watching Brian's piece that you did with him, Brian Slagle, this morning. And it's the same story. It's like, Alan Becker is, he was there right at the beginning as Red and, now at the Orchard. I'm still working with Alan to this day, with the stuff that I do now, so.
That time, the thing I'd like to know, and I don't know if you can tell me this, at some point Case did say, okay, we've done well with Sepultura and we've done well with Obituary and we started this whole Florida death metal scene. Now we do need to expand. I want to know what the catalyst for that is. And I think it links into what you were saying earlier in terms of the structure. he's treating his independent outfit like a major in terms of the money they're spending, and also in terms of the opportunities they're trying to propagate and all the risks they're trying to mitigate. And I think what might have, again, pure speculation, you can tell me if I'm wrong, is it just felt like time for Case before we get compartmentalized as a thrash and death metal label. Let's just take the chance now to explode over here and see how that goes, and then maybe find some opportunities.
Oh, absolutely. But that is the beauty about, you know, this whole this label, that there were so many different aspects to it, and it just grew and grew and grew and grew. And as the companies individually and jointly got better at what they were doing, it attracted more, you know, of the artistic talent. People were coming to you then at that point and going like, hey, you know, what if, right? And that obviously changes the game, because then, you know, the tables have turned in a way if you have, you know, people coming and asking about it, you know. So I think it was the diversity of music. I mean, one of the biggest things for me back in those days was a band called Dog Eat Dog. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Dog Eat Dog is such a special thing because we were able to, MTV was massive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. MTV Europe was massive. And there was one year where we basically got them, to all of our surprise, to become the Breakthrough Artist of the Year in Europe.
Yep.
At the same time, where the US office couldn't, you know, sell the records, even if you paid them for it, because the band wasn't as meaningful over here. And these guys, I mean, you know, I felt really, really bad for them because they were playing massive tours in Europe. They were Dynamo, Fest, you know, all that stuff where you have 100,000 people just going completely nuts and bouncing up and down, right? And then you come back to the US, and of course, for all these musicians, it's just like at some point they want to be able to show, you know, their parents, their friends, how meaningful this is, what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
And to invite them. But if your market is on the other side of the Atlantic, that just gets a little bit more difficult, you know?
Do you think that's something that the satellite offices, I call them the satellite offices, they're obviously their own independent, their own outfits in their own right. But do you think that was a growing pain, understanding that those different territories are completely different? And I say this with experience speaking with some of the UK Roadrunner guys. There was an expectation to try and sign the next Oasis or something like that, but there just wasn't the resources to do it as much as the other labels in the area. So it was really difficult for, say, Andy Saunders or Miles Leonard to go out and say, this indie band is the next great thing, or this sort of British Dog Eat Dog or whatever. Was that recognized as a problem? Or was it just, no, we're going to cast the net nice and wide and we'll just see what happens?
I think it was the latter.
Yeah.
Just cast the net wide and just, you know, it had to have some kind of connection to, you know, the Roadrunner core, but the core changed too. Yeah. It wasn't it wasn't a static thing. And as, you know, more and more music came in, and as we were successful with individual artists in their home territories, because they were signed for that specific purpose.
Yeah.
Sure, if you have a European act, like a French act, a German act, a Dutch act, and you are a company that has both feet in the US as well as in Europe, then you're hoping that, you know, you can make that transatlantic trip maybe and become someone somewhere. But that's usually not how it worked for European artists coming over to the US. It was the other way around. The New York office was the A&R source for everything of the big artists like Monty, you know, Howie Gitter, all these guys that were, you know, the A&R side. And On the European side, I think we were, let's say at the beginning, more commercially successful with the music that was given to us, and to exploit it. And it took, a while for the U.S. office to catch up. But obviously, once they did, it just like took off like a rocket. Yeah.
We're moving into territories, everything I really want to talk about, but I have got some questions. I tried to keep it somewhat chronologically. However, we're into like an area which I wanted to talk about. So I want to ask you two sort of questions about the international market and in terms of the strong arms of Roadrunner as a whole. Then I'll move it back to the actual questions. So in the spirit of certain territories having certain strengths, and sometimes that having some discord against against the US, did you have any input in Japan? You will have seen where I'm getting at with the Brian conversation this morning.
Yeah, no, not the Japanese thing was always Case's direct baby. We had, once we started having international meetings, which took a lot of years until we got to that point. We had a Japanese colleague. I believe his name was Shusuke Kawahara. Yeah,
oh,
and Shusuke came. I met Shusuke first time at an international meeting that we had, I think in Amsterdam somewhere. And the problem there was that communication was very, very difficult. English, he was trying his utmost, and of course none of us spoke any Japanese or whatnot. You sometimes almost felt that in order to get them onto the same onto the same team, you would have needed a translator. Yeah. But the Japanese market was so far away. Yeah. Case loves Japan. I think that is something that I can say from knowing him. He was a great collector together with his wife of Japanese woodblock prints, and they have a very, very specialized museum in Amsterdam. The Japanese ambassador to the Netherlands was at the opening, right? It's a really, Case collected, and his wife, they collected a certain style that was not, because again, they were ahead of the curve, right? But he loved to travel to Japan at least once a year, spend some time there. The Japanese market to me was just indecipherable. I could not make sense of it. And I think it had a lot to do with, at that point, Japanese, culture, business culture, and language.
That's interesting. I think another thing about I was saying this with Brian, I think there's a very specific kind of market. They like tangible things, as in they're not going to settle for streaming. It's not going to be quite as viable, but there's also a virtuosity to that market, which is why Marty Friedman does really well over there. No, I mean, there are, artists that have always done well up there, and you go like, how can that be, right? But it is. I know that Case had a consultant over there who was a Dutchman who had lived there, who spoke Japanese. So he was very much understanding of the cultural aspects of doing business over there. And so I think there was a direct connection there that Case used from Amsterdam whenever he needed to get something done in Japan. And Shusuke was, the guy who ran the office, and I'm sure that there were other people that worked there. And Shusuke was a great guy, Yeah. I just find it fascinating. And with Case as well, you mentioned the art stuff. There's two I'll call them cultural exports from Japan, which I think made their presence in Roadrunner. One was that Roadrunner licensed to the Far East Metal Syndicate, which, from what I can gather, was like one of the only metal labels in Japan at the time. Yeah. I don't know who else managed to get the records out there, but I think Roadrunner was the link in the chain. You get Neat, you get Metal Blade, you get SPV, you'd get whoever. Yep. They'd license something out to Roadrunner, and then Roadrunner would do the lifting and get it out to Japan. And I think that's really really fascinating. I'd love to know if there's some Japanese metal fans out there who are like, oh yeah, we got our records from the various metal syndicate, this great band Merciful Fate, this great band Satan, whatever. My second thing was the Slimline Roadrunner collection, which is some of the first CDs ever produced, or at least first metal CDs, were Roadrunner CDs from Japan. I can see why, because Case is obviously going over there, and he obviously loves the culture, and he's an innovator in himself.
Yeah.
So
technology, everything. It was think about back in those days. It was like Sony was a big technology company, first and foremost, and then just gradually went into all these other things. And look, I've been listening to some of your podcasts, and one thing that you make that you always talk about is the fact that Case, when he really started this, was 35, 36 years old. Very, very knowledgeable. I'm sorry?
He's 41. I've now developed my knowledge in that area.
So you've got your timeline. There you go. So, yes, absolutely. With his experience and his background and everything that he had done previously, he was absolutely primed to be successful with this company and what he was doing, the licensing part at the beginning, and then just growing these companies. To me, I mean, the stroke of genius is opening these offices, because that gave you so much more control over those markets than other companies would ever have, because you were part of the local, scene.
I was going to say, let's unpack that. Let's try and decipher a before scenario and an after scenario, because in my head, why? I mean, I guess I guess it's pennies, isn't it? That's the difference. Because if you don't have an office in the United Kingdom, what are you going to do? You're going to license your albums out to Neat Records, to Music for Nations, and they're going to do the job for you, and maybe you lose pennies. But if you have an office there, you have a direct A&R. You are a direct A&R competitor, and if you can smell blood, you can jump on there before Martin Hooker, and you can jump on there before Dave Hill. Is that the only difference?
I don't think so let me interrupt you there. I don't think the difference is not pennies. Yeah,
cool.
The difference is a lot more than just pennies. Licensing stuff out, and having as a licensor, you're dealing with your distributor. You have to have product flow. Yeah, very important scenario. So licensing material from others is a way of filling the gaps with your own signings, with your own releases, your own records. Because don't forget, it's no company starts and has a roster of 50 artists that are established on their fifth album. With a track record. You start off signing a band here, a band there, and it grows, right? But you still have holes, because you cannot, from a business point of view, dictate to an artist when he has to deliver a record to suit your timeline as a company, to have something that's like nice and round and whatnot. You have to fill gaps in your release schedule, and the licensing part is what?
No, my second sort of big question before I go on to normal questions was an epiphany about the licensing. It was something that struck me last night that changed the entire way I see how the label's trying to position itself. And you just added a cherry on top to that epiphany. So keep going.
Very good. So it fills holes in your release schedule. Yeah. You might find that your top sellers are all bunching up for towards the fall of a year. And you're going to have an excellent, sales period at that time, where you have maybe 2 or 3 really important releases coming. But how do you handle the spring? Yeah. And the licensing part is a very quick and easy piece that falls into that, plugging the hole scenario, because your distributors, they want product flow. They want to have, to take you seriously. And that's what we were, aiming for. That's what we wanted. We wanted to give people, this business, of course, but we also wanted to be able to be in a position to let's say, not demand. It's like that's too strong of a word, but to have conversations and be prioritized within a distributor's system at a certain time.
That's so cool. I've written down product flow because I'm going to try and come back to that, because this is exactly why I wanted to talk to you, because it's just understanding the strength of strategy in these kind of avenues. And I'm not in the industry, so I don't know what the value is. And I think it's important to understand that. If I'm gonna fight the fight, which I'm gonna fight, which is against oversaturation and learning what Roadrunner did. But I'll tell you what the big epiphany was. So I always considered Roadrunner, its branding was on the strength of its direct signings. Right. I always thought it was, it's the Sepultura brand, it's the DSI brand, it's the Trivium brand, it's the Typo brand, it's all that stuff. And I always wondered, so what's the value of the licensing arm? Because it's so present. There's even an ad in Billboard, which I'll show you later. I might have already shown you because you're on it, where Roadrunner is saying, we want to license your album in the United States. Here's our numbers from this year. Contact Stefan at Lafayette. And it's like half a page. So it's like, even all the way up to 2012, Roadrunner take licensing very seriously.
All the time. Absolutely.
Very seriously. And I always wondered why. And I thought it was because, right, well, if you can make the pennies, which you told me isn't pennies, if you can make the pennies, then you can keep the lights on while you invest in something riskier. I thought that was the dynamic. And then I started thinking about Corrosion of Conformity, because I love that band. I love them. Yeah. And they're often cited as a Roadrunner band because, we do great things with Corrosion of Conformity. And there's other bands which fit that same kind of description. We do things with Motorhead. We do great things with Motorhead, Roadrunner. I'm like, well, hang on, Motorhead aren't a Roadrunner band. They were signed to GNR. Hang on, Corrosion of Conformity weren't a Roadrunner band. They were signed to Metal Blade, then moved around a few other places. Maybe, I can't remember. But they were a Roadrunner direct signing. And then I realized it's all about territorial branding. Because when the wall comes down in Berlin, you're probably wanting to have a good hardcore and punk brand. And one way to do that is to license out. If some kid goes into a shop and sees Corrosion of Conformity's Animosity and it says Roadrunner on it, it's going to have a far more profound effect. It might even make you another $50 over the next year against what another label might do. To me, that was like, amazing. And you've just said there, plus it's about the revenue flow and it's about the product flow and making sure you can cherry pick certain products to fill the May gap and fill the December gap.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what, a big chunk of going down to Meedem every year, south of France was. Yeah. I mean, Meedem was this big event in a just gorgeous setting. The temperatures were spring-like, while, in Amsterdam, you were still it was cold and rainy. So it was always, great to go, down to Meedem. But at Meedem, you were having, American business partners came over. People were talking about, I've got this, that, and the other. I remember having meetings with people in either a hotel room or in an apartment that we then rented, where you would literally just going through. They were giving you the tapes, and you were listening to it, or CDs at that point, right? Mm-hmm. And it was it went no, yes, no. It's just, that's where you picked up a lot of the product. I mean, obviously, Case had well-established relationships with people that he knew, and he was able to, and don't forget, back then too, which is a really important thing, I think. One of the big things for us was to coordinate, which was a big piece of my job, to coordinate worldwide releases for our priority artists, right? Which was something that, I think we were one of the first ones that pulled that off outside of the major system.
As in, when you say worldwide releases, you're meaning Sepultura Roots comes out March 30th everywhere, as opposed to US.
Yes, correct. Yeah. And so many of these licensing deals, it might have, what was so convenient about it often was that these were records that had already been released in parts, maybe in the US. So the artwork existed. You didn't have to wait for anything, right? It was just basically strike a deal. Here's the audio, here's the artwork, here's the master. Send it over and we can start production, right?
Wow. Yeah.
And then at that time, that's how you can kind of fit it into your schedule, more so than into someone else's schedule. And at that point, it was still like, the trafficking wasn't that intense yet. Yeah. I mean, look, it was Bertus, always Bertus. Bertus was always picking and trying to, undercut you and whatnot in terms of getting stuff out before, you had it properly set up. But no, I mean, I'm just like looking at the same list here that you're showing, the Discogs thing. I'm just looking for a specific release of, just to give you an idea, the Yellow Magic Orchestra. Yeah. I mean, that's Ryuichi Sakamoto, who then went on to do a lot of music for with others. And that was a licensing deal. Yeah, we suddenly had 3 Yellow Magic Orchestra records. Look, I had to read the bio. I didn't know who they were or what what the story was. None of us knew. But it was, okay, we'll we'll release that one here, then the next one there, and the next one there. And so you began to fill your timeline for the year.
There's the front end. Let's talk about the front end benefit to a licensing deal then. So we mentioned earlier, I thought it was a difference of pennies, right? I thought like if you send your IP overseas and someone else licenses it for you, you're making pennies and not dollars. And similarly, if you're importing someone else's product and selling it, you're making more, but you're not making as much as if it was all your own stuff. Can you break down the difference? So let's say corrosion conformity.
A licensing fee can either work through an advance, that you say to someone, look, I'm going to give you X amount. Let's just say like $10,000, and for that amount, you have to deliver 4 albums within this time frame, right? And we will, sell it in these territories. So for a smaller label, that money might be extremely important because it will help you create those records without taking the artist away from your signing, basically. Yeah. And you have a profit, albeit a smaller one, on the back end. Yeah. After the deal is goes into the plus, right? And it gives your artist a more international presence. Yeah. I think Annihilator, stuff like that. Yeah. I think those deals were struck and done, and those were relationships that were there. That Case had, and it just benefited both sides. Yeah. And I never felt that we were being we could never have enough product. Yeah. Because it was just putting it through. I mean, in Amsterdam, we had a very, very big manufacturing department. Yeah. People who oversaw. Back then, it was nothing came digitally. It was all like you got the films for the artwork, right?
Did Roadrunner manufacture themselves, or was it an Elco at this point?
Well, through these companies, right?
Right. Okay.
But,
whoever it was.
Roadrunner did not have its own manufacturing, anything like that. Yeah. But it was, probably the Sony system in Holland, if I remember correctly.
It certainly was in the US when it was.
Yes.
That's what Alan was telling me anyway. It was cheaper to produce them because initially they'd import it and then they'd push it from New York. But yeah,
the whole printing side of things. I mean, paper printing, right? It was, I believe it was cheaper in Europe than it was in the U.S. The U.S. printing costs were always very, very high, right? So becoming a more international entity, it also offered you more opportunities to do certain things. I mean, in Europe, we were famous for releasing the digipacks, and it was something that in the US, nobody, they were like, why would you do that? Who will buy this? And we were like, there's a gigantic market out there for it.
People
right?
who wear their CDs out because they've got shit CD players will come back and buy the.
Well, that, and then you had bonus tracks on it, and it was, it was a business, of course, yes, people were, loved the artist and whatnot, but we were running a business. That was, the primary thing. And as, the releases, as the artists took more hold and got, more, as there was more feedback, right? You could take these artists. I mean, look, one of the big things for us was developing the international touring circuit for our records. I mean, to get. I remember being in London at some point and talking to a lot of the agents, and the only one that I remember, the only Roadrunner artist at that time that really had a top-notch UK agent was Sepultura. And they were working with Rod McSween at ITB. And we then, step by step, Mark was involved. I mean, I was talking to Ian Sales, who was at Helter Skelter. And Ian took on a whole bunch of Roadrunner acts, and was extremely successful with it because, the growth had to come through both the recorded music side and the live presence. And I mean, back then, don't forget, it was completely different than it is in this day and age today. Back then, the record companies were king because they paid the touring advances. Yeah.
And in this case, Case had Blue Grape as well, who was setting up the T-shirt stands. And,
absolutely. That was Angelique and Felix Sebaceous here on the New York side, and they were creating all this stuff that people were buying left, right, and center. It was just, until the majors caught on to this, I think it took years, years, and that's why you have these metal armies out there, basically. Festivals. I mean, Donington in the UK. We had Rock'em Park in Germany, Wacken. All these festivals, and they just turned into these monsters. That I think what the last I heard was Wacken sells out whatever number of tickets they have, 60,000, let's say, within not even 24 hours.
Yeah, it's a nightmare, mate. I can't go back. I haven't been back for 10 years.
The Wacken Festival puts the new tickets for the next year on sale once the final band goes off the stage. On a Sunday evening, right? And then by the morning, the tickets are gone.
Exactly.
It's crazy.
I'll tell you about my first Wacken experience another time, just because it was such a wonderful. It was a wonderful time, especially for a 16-year-old. There's something you mentioned earlier. How are you doing for time, by the way? Because we've not even got.
I'm fine.
Yeah, brilliant.
I'm fine. I've just cleared the afternoon here. All good.
You know how I roll, don't you? Sometimes it goes. You mentioned something which sparked something in my head, and it was about the printing cost between Europe and the US. I read an article from 1978, I think, with Case. Having issue with parallel importing. Now, parallel importing would be effectively what we call nowadays piracy in a way, where And Sepultura's Roots might come out in Europe, and then someone in the States will go, all right, it's not coming out for 2 months over here. I'll buy it for $30 over there rather than buying it for 45. Just by an example, but
Sure.
rather than buying it for $45 over here. So when you said you could coordinate a worldwide release, that's actually massive, not only from a coordination perspective and a
business
brand
point
perspective.
of view. Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
you all of a sudden mitigated that risk enormously because it's not going to cost anyone. No one has any advantage buying from Europe when they don't need to anymore.
Correct. So it was, getting to that point, and then, talking to the artists and the management at that point, and being able to deliver to them a worldwide release on a specific day, and if the product charted, like let's say like a Machine Head right out of the gate, Burn My Eyes was a monster. Yeah. And it just charted everywhere. It's like, as a manager, Joe Houston just got to see this, and the band got to see, and they were like, oh my God, And so it was just one of those things that worked in our favor, right? To get people to look at Roadrunner and to see what Roadrunner was capable of.
Yeah, definitely. It's all that back end stuff which I was talking about. The front end on licensing is, obviously you're making a little bit of money from someone else's product and it keeps everything busy. The back end is, as I say, that kid in the shop seeing a corrosion conformity record in Germany and going, all right, Roadrunner's the one for me, because that gives you an extra $100 over the next 5 years.
Yeah.
It makes a difference if you multiply that experience by 2-3 continents.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, that was a very important piece. In addition to, delivering and coordinating worldwide, or let's say for me, international marketing plans. Yeah. So while I was in Amsterdam, that was kind of like, coordinate with everybody. This is the record that's coming. What are we going to do? Is everybody lined up in the right way? Do we have advertising in place? Do we have all this stuff? And then, which, I did more than once, just presented a binder of documentation to managers. Yeah. And that was very impressive because they weren't getting that anywhere else.
It must have caused a lot of anxiety with that, though, because you're only as effective as your slowest component. And an international marketing plan on that scale must have a lot of components, which might have been a little bit. It did have a lot of,
you start early,
Yeah.
You start, it's nothing that comes together within a week's time.
Yeah.
So, we knew what the priorities were for the year at the beginning of the year because we had our plans, and obviously the focus was on direct signings to Roadrunner, unless it was something that was in the pipeline that was really big, that had to be handled in a very, very big way. Urban Discipline, Biohazard's record, was that, because it wasn't a direct signing to Roadrunner. It was a one-off, right? And many discussions. Talked to Monty. Case was really dreading the fact that here's his company, and he's getting one record because the band was already signed to a major. At that point, because Leora Cohen wanted to give Biohazard street credibility.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
What better way to do it than through Roadrunner? But, they basically then, I don't know what the terms were or anything like that, but it was a license to a Roadrunner. And it was only one record. And I do want to say, I think it is still Biohazard's most successful record in their career.
Catalog, yeah.
And, it was just, Case did not like the fact that he was turning on the ignition of his machine, Roadrunner Records, for just a one-off, right? But the people working at Roadrunner, us young guys back then, we were just like, no, we want that record. It's going to do so many great things for the label, right? And, it did. So it worked out for all sides, for everybody.
And the inverse happened with Sepultura. I can't remember which. It might have been Chaos. It might have been Arise. I can't remember where they wanted to go. They wanted to experience a major experience. I think they went with Epic for that album.
Yes, it was an attempt, and it just did not deliver the results that Gloria and the band were expecting. Yeah.
From
so
I think I was speaking to Richard.
I believe that there was a change there was an A&R guy over there who was a bigwig. I think it was like the guy that signed Rage and others, and it was, in a way, it was an artificial thing that was tried. It was, I think he left the company and before the record was released, and suddenly nobody, felt responsible for Sepultura. These were weird guys from Brazil, right? And like, oh my God, what do we do? Yeah, it's just like it didn't, work out to the level, I believe, of what Gloria and the band were expecting, and they came back, and it just went on from there because they knew that they were much better taken care of at Roadrunner around the world.
The Sepultura experience and the Biohazard experience are both analogous as to what majors and indies their attitude to the product is. I think Roadrunner did well with both because they knew what to do with the product, because they dragged it from the fringe and put it in front of your face. Whereas I think majors are, well, if you're not going platinum, you're kind of not worth our time. And it's a different mentality.
I don't think that, I wouldn't deny, or I wouldn't, take it away from anybody working at a major corporation, that they have a love for specific artists and really work extremely hard to do that. But maybe we were a little bit freer and not just boxed in the sense that we all had, I think, strong opinions and this, that, and the other. And the promotion person certainly had, the right to, say something about the marketing or whatnot. It was, we all had like weekly marketing and promotion meetings in these companies, right? And so everybody that worked for the company was giving their input for, a national, regional, local level. Yeah. And then that is how these records were released. And then on a higher level above it, so to speak, you had to coordinate all these activities. Yeah. You had to coordinate. I mean, it was just, think about this. You have a release and you need to know your release timing, because between the media hitting in one country versus another, it might be a completely different. I remember that. I mean, in the US, the lead times were massive. I mean, dramatic. You had to start the promotion really, really early, so that because it was a printing issue, right? Because the magazines, we were used to magazines in Europe that came out like bi-weekly, monthly. In the UK, you had even like weeklies, right? And it was a much faster turnaround time. So you had to coordinate, like when are we getting the artist? Like when do we bring in typo for the promo trip, right? And all these elements. When do we have to purchase the advertising, right? When is all of this coming coming in? Where are they going to tour first, right? Big battles over the touring activities, right? In the US, traditionally, you toured an artist, or you still tour an artist before the record comes out. It's a vast country, and you probably couldn't play enough gigs before an album gets released. And in Europe, it's way different, I would say, because it's more driven by the individual nation states, right? Yeah. So you go and you take a band into France, and sure, if you get to a point where you can play 4 or 5 shows in France, that's great. But the real impact show is Paris. Yeah, you have to play in Paris. back to Machine Head, London. They sold out Brixton Academy, like it was nothing. I mean, think about that. Germany was a little bit different because it had more cities. You had, between Berlin, Hamburg, Munich, Cologne, Frankfurt, a whole lot of stuff going on there. But you had to get the artists and the manager's attention to deliver dates that made sense for your campaign. Yeah.
I was gonna say, obviously, because I'm in the UK, usually we're touring to support the album. It's not we're touring in anticipation of the album. Sometimes it's even the album's coming out on a Wednesday and the tour starts that Wednesday night. That's been my experience anyway. Yeah,
it's every territory delivers or develops certain mechanics. Yeah. And you have to kind of like get into the weeds there to figure out, we had plenty of battles, the Germans versus the Brits versus the Dutch versus the French. Everybody wanted something right off the bat and be the first, right? And, you couldn't split a band into, the individual members and then start everywhere at the same time. It just, you had to kind of gauge where the sales would be primarily. And back in those early days, 90, the first half of the 90s, it was very much, the sales came from Germany. I mean, it's just, Germany has still to this day a really great record store infrastructure. I mean, it's waning, but the UK had it too, but it just becomes more and more difficult in this day and age now to actually find a retailer that can physically take your product because a big chunk of business nowadays is done through Amazon physically.
Right. Let's go back to 1992. So you in the Cologne office, what's your role? You said it was the manager, a general manager.
Yes, hired as a general manager for the office, responsible for the German market. We had, responsible for a great deal of the marketing. We had, promo people in there. We had, a small staff of people, and then it was, I traveled from Cologne to Stuttgart at least once a month. Yeah. Right. Okay. Because Intercord, our distributor, was based in Stuttgart, and it was a very, very interesting distribution situation that we had there because they had what we called the big Intercord. So the big Intercord was the machine that they had that had the most salespeople, and so a Sepultura record would go to the big Intercord, right? They would press all the buttons, and then they had the IRS Intercord records. It was the kind of like the indie arm, and you begin to develop relationships with these people. You have joint meetings. They have annual meetings that Case would come in for. We do presentations and have an opportunity to really, amongst, for a distributor, of course, they have a vast variety of product, right? Intercord had a lot of German language stuff, right? They had classical stuff. They had, so all these people are in there coming in with their little presentations, music, videos and whatnot. And, we come in with heavy hitting urban discipline or, other things that would just and everybody in the room was, it was, they liked us and we liked them. It was, everyone was louder. So it was fun.
Is it in that relationship and in the course of working with the distributor and the German market that you earned your chops as the international marketing guru? And is that why Case plucked you from that role and brought you to Amsterdam?
I would say primarily it was because Frank Strobeli, who preceded me in the German office, left Amsterdam, and Case needed someone right away to come in. And
When
that's
did Frank
how.
leave the company, or did he just leave
Yes, he
Amsterdam?
left the company. He went
Right.
to, I think he went to London to Epic. And, it's just like flat out a conversation. Like he called me up and he said, "Do you want to do this?" And I said, "Yeah." That's how we ended up doing this. I moved to Amsterdam,
Mm-hmm.
and suddenly had a different role, and was trying to coordinate, as I said, all these aspects of releasing records on a European level,
Mm.
and streamlining things. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Was it the Van Egenstraat office, or were we on the third office by this point?
No. This was the first office was in the city, and then the second was that I knew of, that I experienced, was in the Bijlmer, closer to the airport.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, it was a freestanding, low-sized building amongst some high rises. It was a weird, location, but it was gigantic for our purposes, and
Sure.
it was, we weren't. There's a lot of space. We weren't as constrained as we were in the other office. But I mean, that's just another signal how the company was growing. Yeah. Because the offices I know about the German office more, and a little bit about the Dutch office. I don't know if, but I think it was the same for Mark in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
As the company grew, as there was more and more, you needed more support, more people, more personnel. And for that, you needed space. So all of these offices, weren't, in the same spot for all this time. There were office moves and into different, areas, into larger properties to deliver what, was needed and necessary.
It makes sense that it was near the airport as well. If Casey's flying to New York every 2 weeks and then Japan once a year.
Oh yeah. I mean, that was obviously a very in Amstelveen, a very important aspect of it. But we had so many people that were just flying all over the place.
Yeah. Were you working at Amsterdam when Bloody Kisses went gold?
Yes.
So did you get to receive the party, the welcome party of the IR? No, it was then Sony Red at that point, wasn't it?
Oh, I was much involved in that. I was like, the case was like, listen, most of these people, or many of them. It's just like, I invited them. They're all coming. So sort it out. And then, there were like, I don't know, like 30 people, probably, right? Maybe more.
Yeah.
And, we had to arrange for dinners, right? So you had to, here you go. So you're dealing with, music and record releases and whatnot. Suddenly you're tasked with finding restaurants and rooms that were big enough, and menus and all that, and translated from Dutch to English so that all these people, could figure it out. And at the same point, at the same time, we had invited the Type O members.
Of course, yeah. Never even occurred to me for some reason. Fair enough.
No, of course. But it was just, it was very, very funny because the two that came with their wives were Kenny and Johnny. Yeah. Yep. Peter and Josh stayed home. They did not come. Look, for Peter, it was always difficult anyway, because he was not comfortable with the different types of foods in different places, because he was very much when he was traveling in Europe, very much a McDonald's guy, because he knew what he was getting, and that's where he wanted to go. And here you are, your company is doing well, you've got some funds, you've got some money, you'd like to take you out for dinners and all that kind of stuff. But no, he wanted to. The food that he knew that he was comfortable with.
He wanted his nuggets, and he wanted to watch TV and.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's just like Peter was a very unique character and unique guy, and they toured Europe many, many times, and it was always like super exciting, and I became really good friends for a certain period of time with Josh. But I think, once everybody started having kids, it was, your concentration goes somewhere else,
Yeah, totally.
But, despite of all the stuff that's being written in the press at the time and now about how, the typo guys hated Roadrunner, I didn't see that. I think that was, they were very, very happy. I know that Josh had a very special relationship with Case. They talked over the phone a lot. Pete was always like this character that had to be bigger. He had to live up to his character all the time.
Yeah.
Larger than life, because he was so tall in stature, that it was it was different. I'm sure that they didn't like the fact that certain things happened in the end, and they subsequently left Roadrunner, but there's no doubt in my mind that the Roadrunner marketing and promotional staff around the world was instrumental in helping get this record out to as many people as it did. Now, obviously, there's you can't do it without the artists and the music, but it's a lot of people pulling in the same direction at the same time is a really important thing.
And it was a coordinated effort by Case's design. It was I was speaking to Jim Salaby, who was obviously the head of sales in New York at the time, and he literally sat Jim down and went over the roster and went, right, I want a gold record in the next 18 months. Jim, draw me a plan. And obviously Jim's a guy that would go, okay, well, your most viable asset in this regard is going to be typo. And then they built it from there. So it's so interesting to me that, because I think the conventional music industry stories is just either the label is just a massive bloke with a cigar behind a desk exploiting the artist, or it's absolute anarchy and kids running around. But here is a complete structure, a complete campaign.
I can't even, I can't even describe it. It was a whole bunch of young people, both male and female, coming together in this company and then growing with the company, and obviously, doing a lot of things in the right way. And Case giving people a lot of, which I think he really did, a lot of leeway to do what needed to be done. Right. I remember Case for his speeches a lot. He was someone that could rally the troops and focus people at these international meetings in a way that I've never ever come across anybody that could speak in front of a group of young people in that way, in that sense, giving them, applauding their efforts and giving them direction and rallying, the troops, so to speak. He was fantastic when it came to his speeches that he had to give on many occasions, and so that made you. I mean, he was also because he was older than all of us, right? He was also a fairly stern taskmaster. He wanted things done a certain way, and you had to either do it that way, or you were in trouble, right? But I always experienced him I had a lot of leeway. We were very, very successful with a lot of things that we did. Lots of artists that grew. It was, we were all lucky. Lucky in the sense that it was the right time for the music, and lucky in the sense that we ended up, working at this place called Roadrunner Records in around the world in different offices, kind of doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Because look at where the people ended up. Stefan Saunier ended up at Canal Plus in Paris with his own TV show. Mark is Nuclear Blast together with with what Monty's doing right now.
With half the Roadrunner roster.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. So, and that roster only became available because, what the major Roadrunner turned into, or what they it's different. It's the Roadrunner that I remember is most certainly different from what it is now.
Yeah, totally. So while you're the international marketing leader in Amsterdam, were there any particular records that you found challenging? I was looking at my list here and I'm thinking Frontline Assembly was quite, for the time, quite enigmatic. And it was, I think I remember speaking to Gary Livermore, who obviously the Third Mind Records, which was Frontline Assembly's was a kind of baby. And he thinks that Case wanted him to sign the next Nine Inch Nails. So there's clearly an angle to that. I'm just wondering if the European market responded to that industrial sound.
Not that I recall to that degree. I mean, my time in Amsterdam, the Dutch Gabba dance scene, Mokum Records, all that stuff was running parallel to our rock and metal stuff. And that took up a lot of oxygen. But again, you were like, I was in Amsterdam. That's where this stuff was happening. And it is, there's only so much concentration and time you can dedicate to something. And very often when it comes to specific signings, it's all about, they have to prove themselves in their local market first, before you even look at them from an international point of view, right? Because, if they can't make it at home, then, why are you even contemplating doing something with them in a foreign territory where nobody knows, right?
Yeah. Interesting.
So, no, it just, at that time for me, it was, the big acts that I was always dealing with, that we were always, that we had at the forefront of our minds, were Sepultura, Typo Negative, Life of Agony, Dog Eat Dog for us in Europe, Fear Factory, Machine Head. I'm sure I'm forgetting some here, but those were that's the core, that's the spine of Roadrunner at that time.
Yeah. I was also going to ask about Brugera, just because the antithesis of what you were saying there in terms of you have these big acts that you're front and center of. Brugera was kind of designed to be underground in a way, wasn't it?
Oh, of course. Yeah, absolutely.
You're not going to tell Alan Becker, look, we're going to want 60,000 of these units. No, this is going to be a very, very niche product that we're going to put out.
I remember that you had to, here in the US, that cover had to be covered. There was some, like a black box that was over it, so you couldn't see the actual cover. Whereas
that sold it, wouldn't it? Surely that's what kids want.
Well, whereas in Europe you didn't have to do that, and it just, like, you just sell it. It was just like, I mean, these were all like these Monty signings and all these the Oscar, like the nail bombs and other things that came through. And it was, for us, I mean, it was literally just, let's sell this, sell it, right? Yeah. So the sales aspect was a very, very big dominating piece of the whole enterprise.
This question specifically about Fear Factory is kind of, I'm trying to articulate it, but it's difficult to articulate. I'm at a point now where I'm looking at Dino and I'm looking at his career with Roadrunner. I'm thinking he was so on board from like day one. It feels like he lived and it felt like he lived and breathed Roadrunner as a brand. And I feel like he really wanted to deliver for you guys. I just get that impression, but I have no means to articulate or prove that. Is that something, am I on the right lines of how that band managed their relationship with the label? Were they really always trying to deliver? Or were they going through the motions of, oh, we're going to have an album cycle. Oh, the label wants this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay,
I think that's
something special.
That would be a question that, most likely Monty could answer much, much better than I could. It was something that had a spark, that worked. The press
Yeah.
was behind it, the media was behind it, and we were able to sell it. And so, it's, you don't, other than maybe like A&R people, you can't develop a personal relationship with each and every one of these artists that come through. Yeah. You're closer to some than you are to others. It's you're professional, of course, right? But it is, something where, Fear Factory festival stuff, I remember, they were always, there, they toured but it wasn't, I couldn't answer that question that you're asking.
No, it's cool. I think it's,
I just don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm always going about how Roadrunner brings the fringe and it makes it commercially viable and things like that. But I think like with Dino and with Fear Factory, there is an arc to how that sound was developed. And I feel like Roadrunner had a big part to play in it. But you are right, it is an A&R question at its roots. So let's move forward a little bit. What summoned you to New York?
Oh, my desire to, at that time, I had been in Amsterdam, I think, for like 3 years.
Right.
And I had asked Case. So my whole thing was I wanted to move to London, and continue working for Roadrunner. I wanted to just set up a small little desk in Mark Palmer's office and do international from there, right?
Okay.
And the reason being is that all the larger entities, larger record companies had their international offices in London, right? Mm-hmm. And we were in Amsterdam, and it was like off the beaten track, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
In a way, I mean, the artists, of course, loved Amsterdam for many, many reasons, but I wanted to move move to London. I asked Case, and Case was like, "Nope, under no circumstances. I'm not having another, department, whatever you wanted to call it, international, based out of London, right? We do that here." And
I presume it's just because he wants oversight. It's not for no other reason.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I worked very, very closely with Case for a long period of time, and offices next to each other, and short ways of communicating and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And and it was his suggestion, right? At that point, I said, I want to get out of Amsterdam. I feel I need to move on, right? Mm-hmm. It was his suggestion at that point to then say, like, well, what about New York? And you'll do that stuff out of the New York office because I'm there every other week anyway. So that's not that much of a difference for me, because I mean, international goes on in Amsterdam for Europe when he's in New York, and vice versa. And I just jumped at that opportunity, of course.
Yeah. Okay.
Moved my whole life out of Amsterdam, and arrived in Amsterdam the day of Diana's passing, Princess Diana's passing. It was, I drove to the airport in the morning early, and there was all this stuff on the radio, and got on the plane, and then got off in at JFK, and drove through the city, into the city from JFK, and they had put up all these like little, I don't know, almost like shrines to her in the little bodegas outside, and flowers and pictures and all that kind of stuff. So I'll remember just
because I know exactly where I was the day you.
It's one of those moments, right? It's one of those things that you just remember, and so that was my arrival in New York. But I had been to New York so many times prior to that, because we had lots of meetings here, meeting with the company, meeting with managers, meeting with artists, and trying to be on top of what I said before, like this coordination or coordinating effort to streamline what was happening.
So when you go to New York, is your role the same, or is it we're now moving out of Europe and it's a different coordination?
Yeah, it's basically in Europe, I did it on a European level, and in New York, I did it. I think it was still more of a European level, but based out of New York. It was the New York office. I mean, those guys did what they needed to do, and we sat together in the management meetings and discussed timelines and whatnot, and sorted that out. But at that point, after Bloody Kisses and the success that came with that, the New York office just took on a different air, because these were their artists, and now that they had proven that they could deliver in a way that hadn't happened before, then of course it became all about what they wanted, and so the tide turned. It flipped.
Sure. Yeah. Did you ever find yourself carrying out stunts from a publicity and marketing perspective? Was there any kind of shtick that you ever went for? I'm just saying this because I know Case did that in his earlier career. And I was wondering if any of that rubbed off on you.
Not in that sense. No. I think like what I enjoyed working together with the production teams on creating very, very special product. I mean, if you remember the wooden box for Sepultura's Roots, did you ever see that one?
No, I was just a little boy.
You got to look that one up. That was a piece of art that we did not sell, but I think we made, I don't know if I remember correctly, maybe 200 of those.
Right.
And it just encapsulated, I think, in a really, really cool way, the Brazilian nature of Sepultura and this release with all the stuff that we have. And I mean, these boxes sell for insane amounts of money on, eBay and wherever at this point. But no, it was just like taking something like that and trying to enhance it and do something either for, these boxes were handed out to distribution partners. They were handed out to, media partners, important media partners, and just a handful of people.
I guess there's no stunts involved, but it's value. It's value. It's biggest bang for your buck.
And it's just like, it also shows the people that are on the receiving end of something like this, the dedication to the project, the dedication to the artist that you as a representative of this company have, right? Because you're not giving it to anybody and everybody. It's just a very select few people. And, in a way, is it like, it's not like a bribe or anything like that. But if you got that, you knew that it was expected that, there was some kind of, support for the artist that went above and beyond what normally would be the case.
Yeah.
So you're just like, you're using the tools of what is available. And that, I have to say, again, I mean, that's, Case for you right there. There's never an idea like that he kind of like shot down because he was, that's nonsense. Yeah. Not at all. It was, that was part of the whole thing.
I find Case interesting as obviously hearing from other people about the kind of leader he was, because there's the spectrum is always, as I say, he was a very hard taskmaster. You want to do things in a specific way, and he wasn't afraid of calling you out for underperforming. But at the same time, there's another one where he's also really keen on developing his staff, and he's really keen on making sure everyone's comfortable and happy. And a lot of the time it's, look, deliver for me and I'll get out of your way. That seems to be like the ethos. And a lot of people walk away thinking, a lot of people walk away having Cases like almost paternal figure. And it's in a lot of these interviews, a lot of people say that he's a father figure. Did you get that impression?
Oh, I think absolutely. I looked up to, he was the first really successful businessman that I had met, and someone that, talk about being in demand on a daily basis, because he was fielding phone calls from around the world.
Yeah.
every day. Yeah. And he had to, at the drop of a dime, switch from that problem to that problem and know what he was like talking about and know what he wanted. So it was very, I often wondered, how he managed I had a time where I was flying between New York and Amsterdam every other week.
Mm-hmm.
And it just blew my mind. It was so, so difficult. At the beginning, at first you're like, man, this is cool. This is like the jet set lifestyle. But after like a month of doing it, 6 weeks, you're going like, oh, where am I? And he was greatly involved and enjoyed, this business of Roadrunner and developing this company. And I think he had a plan, he had vision, and he, kind of. But I mean, think about it too. It's like, as the company grew, as more and more people came into work at these Roadrunner companies, Case still tried to understand who was who everywhere, but it wasn't like, back in those days and the early days. I mean, it was different for me because he knew who I was, I knew who he was, and I can kind of like, I could figure out what kind of mood he was in, basically, right? Because we were working together in the same office and talking about the same things.
Yeah.
But it was also, I mean, it went so, I mean, it was, I remember like, spending a lot of weekends in the office with, Case coming in at some point or already being there. And it always, these weekends allowed me to have very, very intense and interesting conversations with Case about where he wanted to take something, right? To kind of like get into his head a little bit.
Yeah.
And also to explain, where the problems were that I saw. I mean, if it meant we had one situation, I don't even remember what it was anymore, but it was, it was a typo related thing. And it was, I think it was a touring thing because Pete had said he did not want to come to Europe on the festival tours and whatnot. And it was just one of those things where Pete was just like really, just like didn't want to do it. And I said, listen, I feel like I need to fly over there and talk to him, right? And Case was just fine, get on a plane, and it's just like, so I'm flying into some place in Texas, right? And get to, talk to the band and help sort things out, and fly back. So it was, that's what I mean. It's just, I had so much leeway in doing a lot of these things. And it was fun to work there. It really was.
Ed Von Sell said Case would, 2 days before going to New York on any given day, he'd have lunch on New York time just to prepare himself.
Right. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Easily.
Makes sense. Did you attend Dynamo 1995?
Yes.
So to me, I've asked a few people about Dynamo 95. None of them can tell me anything because they can't remember what happened. But all I know is that anyone talking about Dynamo 95 is full of like heartfelt platitudes and great memories and how it was a big moment for the label. And I think it might be something to do with the fact that more than 50% of the lineup, especially on the Saturday, were all Roadrunner acts, and they all went down really well. So I don't know if it was in your head, why was it a milestone? Was it because
we controlled the backstage area to a degree? We had Roadrunner umbrellas. I mean, these gigantic, massive umbrellas, and we had bars set up. We had like anybody and everybody. We had passes for everybody. We had backstage access. It was done we were away from where the artist backstage area was, right? So that was a separate area, but we had set this thing up. And then of course, when you have this, I mean, I don't know. It was a once in a lifetime event. Yeah. to have that many artists and to have 100,000 people out there, right? That were all there to see your artists, or to a large degree. I mean, you were inviting, I mean, think about it. At that time, we still had different distributors in each European country, right? You would extend an invitation to people to come in and join you. And it was just like, it was a gigantic, fest backstage. And we had, access to the stage. I mean, look at the video, it's just like, you see all these people on these stages and on two levels, and it was just, nobody stopped us. The security knew who we were. And it was just like,
I was trying to I've been looking into it and trying to play the angle of, it's a milestone moment for the label, because it's probably the first time there's so many acts that are there together. There was a lot of groundbreaking performances, and then there was some, perhaps maybe I should check SoundScan or something and see how that did for the performance. It actually created more sustenance for the brand. But now you're coming in and saying, nah, we just got shit-faced in our own little bit.
Everybody it was just like, it was, there's so many funny stories that happened at these festivals. It is just, I mean, you would go and hang out, all day long, right? Because, of course, if you had a baby act that was performing and playing early on, it didn't mean that you couldn't show up. You had to be there, because that was the whole thing. You supported the bands that were on the label and that were there. And if it means that you had a baby act that was performing at, 2:00 in the afternoon, potentially when the festival was starting, or noon or whatever, and you'd had a really, really, really late night, didn't matter. People were there. People showed up. It was that kind of a thing. But Dynamo 95 was, I mean, the crowd was just, I don't think I've ever seen anything like it again.
Was Dynamo still arranged by, is his name Anders, who works for Hard Shock magazine? Was that still his baby at that point?
That I don't know. I thought it was Rob Trumlin, Mojo.
I'm not sure. I know the early Dynamos were Anders from Hard Shock. I know I could be.
I mean, it was just like, look, the metal world came together in Eindhoven at this place, took over the city, which it's a small town, right? But it combined, it delivered a lot of economic earnings potential for the people that, run businesses there, be it, food or overnight or whatever. Did you have crazy stuff happening? Drunk metal kids, stoned metal kids, peeing in someone's garden? I am sure that there was tons and tons and tons of stuff like that, right? Or crashing into a garden fence or whatever. But it was Holland. It was it was very very easygoing. And then it just got too big, and it was just it was they had to move it. So, but that Dynamo, with everything that went on there were other Dynamos before and after, where we had a lot of artists. There was a time period where that festival was so meaningful in Europe, and all of our Roadrunner acts, sometimes more than other times, came through and performed.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I'll have to keep plugging away and see what else.
Case was always there. It was, I mean, Case always came. He was always there. He did the rounds. He didn't, he obviously he didn't drink or anything. He was just there. He saw the performances. He was, the figurehead for all of this.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Let's bring this train into the station, because I've nicked 2 hours of your time. So how did your relationship with Roadrunner end? How did you move on?
I think it kind of got into a situation where I went to New York, and I don't think that case was very happy and secure with how the international side of the European business was developing with me having left. And he then came to me and said, like, listen, I need you on both sides. You got to, if you need to come back. That was the first thing he said. And I said, Case, I just moved my whole life to here. I'm not going back, right? And it was the first time, I think, really, that I said no to him. And I then started, flying back and forth like crazy. Back in those days, I was a chain smoker, right? Did not live a very healthy lifestyle, and I ended up, having heart problems and getting very sick.
Right.
And so, the combination of all of that happening, and probably a whole bunch of situations that it's difficult to explain why this whole thing ended. There was a certain time where Case and I went and had lunch. He said to me, like, come on, let's have lunch. And we sat down, and I looked at him and I said, so this is it, right? And he's like, yeah. And we were just like, okay, so this is it. It's just sometimes things run their course.
Yeah. Did you ever have the pleasure of attending one of the Christmas parties?
Oh yeah, I mean, lots of Christmas parties, specifically here in New York. I mean, there's plenty of stories to go around. Be it Scott Gibbons's a punch bowl, which was basically a trash can, a gigantic metal trash can, where it was filled with alcohol, and it was just mixed together. It was just like whatever, whiskey and vodka and everything was just poured into this thing, and everybody was. I mean, the Christmas parties at Roadrunner, especially like the later ones, were gigantic, right? Because Roadrunner in the US was one of the last companies that still did Christmas parties. Yeah. So the whole metal community in New York descended upon the Roadrunner offices. And you couldn't get through the front door.
Last question. I've been striking out on this one for the last 10 interviews or so, but I'm still holding the faith. Have you ever seen a ghost?
Have I seen a ghost? Nope, I have not.
Okay. That's another strike. That's another strikeout.
Okay, what do we do with the ghost question? I'm just gonna be like, after like all this time, straight up, nope.
Nah, it's cool. It's cool. I'm gonna get. I've got enough ghost stories, both written and verbal, that I can collate them all into like the Ghosts of Roadrunner.
There you go.
Video or something like that. So I'm gonna try and do that, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask. Well, thank you very much, Stefan. That was awesome. We picked so many lanes, which are exactly. I don't know if like you picked up on, say the previous podcast where you're like, oh, this guy is like talking about the business side of it.